The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, and Maya Chen stood at her second-floor window watching. The world below transform into a churning brown river. The floodwaters had swallowed the street signs, submerged the cars, and turned her quiet neighborhood in Portland into an apocalyptic waterscape. She was alone, her daughter safe at college in California, her ex-husband somewhere across the country with his new family. At 52, Maya had grown accustomed to solitude, even found comfort in it. But as she watched a patio chair tumble past in the current, she felt the weight of her isolation pressing against her chest like a physical thing. She had food for a week, candles for when the power finally gave out, and enough silence to last a lifetime. What she didn't have was any reason to expect that the desperate figure she was, about to see clinging to a floating dumpster, would change everything. She thought she knew about her carefully ordered, cautiously guarded life. The figure emerged from around the corner, arms wrapped desperately around the metal container, legs kicking frantically against the current. Maya's breath caught. Even from this distance, she could see the exhaustion in every movement, the way the person's head kept dipping below the surface before jerking back up. Without thinking, she grabbed the emergency rope she'd pulled from her garage the day before, tied it to the radiator, and threw open her window. "Here, grab the rope!" Her voice barely carried over the roar of the water, but the figure's head snapped up. It was a man she could see now, older than she'd first thought, with silver hair plastered to his skull and terror etched across his face. She threw the rope with all her strength. It fell short. She hauled it back, her hands already burning, and tried again. This time, his fingers closed around it. Maya pulled with every ounce of strength she possessed. Her feet braced against the wall, her shoulders screaming in protest. Inch by agonizing inch, she drew him closer to the building. When he finally reached the window, she grabbed his coat and helped haul him through, both of them collapsing onto her. Living room floor in a tangle of soaking limbs and gasping breaths. For a long moment, neither spoke. Maya pushed herself up first, looking at the stranger who now lay on her hardwood floor like a beached fish, chest heaving, eyes closed. He was perhaps 60, she guessed, with a weathered face and clothes that might have been expensive once but were now torn and filthy. A gash across his forehead leaked blood that mixed with the floodwater pooling around him. "I'll get towels," she managed, her voice shaking. "And the first aid kit." "Thank you," he whispered, the words barely audible. "God, thank you." His name was Robert Thornton, and he'd been visiting Portland from Seattle when the flood hit. His rental car had stalled on a bridge, and he'd barely made it out before the current swept the vehicle away. He'd been in the water for nearly an hour, watching houses and trees and pieces of other people's lives flow past, certain he was going to die. Maya cleaned the wound on his head, her hands steadier than she'd expected. She brought him dry clothes that had belonged to her ex-husband, still packed in boxes in the spare room that she'd been meaning to donate for 2 years. She made hot tea and opened her emergency supplies without hesitation. "You should rest," she said, leading him to the guest room. "The water won't go down tonight. Maybe not tomorrow either." "I don't want to impose," Robert protested weakly. But he was already sitting on the bed, his body making the decision his words couldn't. "You're not imposing. You're surviving. There's a difference." That first night, Maya lay awake listening to the rain hammer against the roof and the stranger's movements in the next room. What had she done? Pulling a complete stranger into her home. She reached for her phone, then remembered the cell towers were down. No way to contact anyone, no way to verify his story. She should have been afraid, but somehow she wasn't. The power died at 2 in the morning. In the darkness, Maya heard Robert's door open. "Maya, are you all right?" "I'm fine. There are candles in the kitchen drawer." They ended up sitting at her kitchen table in the flickering light, neither able to sleep. And they talked. Robert told her about his wife, Sarah, who died of cancer 3 years ago. How he'd spent those years since just going through the motions, running the architecture firm he'd built, traveling to fill the emptiness, never really connecting with anyone. Maya found herself sharing things she hadn't spoken aloud in years. How her marriage had crumbled slowly, how her daughter's absence left an ache she couldn't name, how she'd taken early retirement from teaching and now spent her days volunteering at the library, trying to feel useful. "Do you know what's strange?" Robert said, staring at his candle's flame. This morning I stood on that bridge looking at the water rising, and I thought about just letting go. Not jumping, just not fighting. I was so tired of carrying everything alone. Maya's throat tightened. What changed? I saw a bird, he said, a sad smile crossing his face. A sparrow, caught in the current, struggling against the water. And it made it to a tree. This tiny thing, weighing nothing, and it didn't give up. I thought, if that bird can fight, so can I. I'm glad you did, Maya said softly. Fight, I mean. Over the next 4 days, as the water slowly receded, Maya and Robert became unlikely companions in survival. They rationed food, played cards by candlelight, and shared the strange intimacy that emerges when strangers face crisis together. Robert fixed the leak in her bathroom that she'd been ignoring for months. Maya taught him how to make her grandmother's soup using canned goods and creativity. They took turns reading aloud from the books on her shelves, creating stories to drown out the constant sound of water. But it was the small moments Maya found herself treasuring, the way Robert laughed at her terrible jokes, how he noticed when she got quiet and asked if she was okay. The morning she found him trying to make coffee with her camping percolator, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he studied the instructions with intense concentration. On the 5th day, the water had receded enough that emergency services were evacuating people by boat. Maya packed her emergency bag mechanically, trying not to think about the fact that Robert would leave, would go back to Seattle, and she'd return to her carefully organized solitude. Maya, Robert said as they waited for the rescue boat, I need to tell you something. Her heart clenched. Here it came, the goodbye. The promise to keep in touch that they both knew wouldn't happen. When I left Seattle, I'd made a decision. I was going to sell my firm, sell my house, and just disappear. Go somewhere nobody knew me and start over. Reinvent myself completely or just fade away. I hadn't decided which. Maya looked at him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. But these past few days, he continued, talking with you, being here, it reminded me what it feels like to actually be alive. Not just existing, not just going through motions, but really living, connecting with someone. Robert, I'm not saying this right, he interrupted, running his hand through his hair. What I'm trying to say is, you saved more than my life that day. You reminded me why it's worth living, and I was wondering, hoping, really, if maybe I could stay in Portland for a while. Get to know this city, get to know you better, if you'd want that. Maya felt tears prick her eyes. She thought about her empty house, her carefully controlled life, the walls she'd built to protect herself from more hurt. And she thought about the warmth of the past few days, the laughter, the conversation, the feeling of mattering to someone again. I'd like that, she said. I'd like that very much. The rescue boat arrived, and they climbed aboard with the other evacuees, heading toward the emergency shelter downtown. Robert's hand found hers as they watched the flooded neighborhood recede, and Maya didn't let go. 6 months later, Maya stood in her living room, watching Robert hang the last painting on her wall, their wall now. He'd sold his Seattle firm but started a small local practice, designing sustainable housing for flood-prone areas. Maya had returned to teaching part-time at the community college. Her daughter had visited twice, delighted to see her mother happy, to meet the man who'd accidentally sailed into her life on a dumpster and stayed. You know what I think about sometimes? Maya said, wrapping her arms around Robert from behind as he adjusted the frame. What's that? That sparrow you saw. The one that made you fight. Robert turned to face her, his eyes crinkling with the smile she'd grown to love. What about it? I think sometimes we're the sparrow, struggling against the current. And sometimes we're the tree, offering shelter when someone needs it most. We take turns. That's how we survive. He kissed her forehead. I think you're right. And I think I'm the luckiest man alive that you were my tree. Outside, rain began to fall, gentle this time, nourishing instead of destructive. Maya no longer feared the solitude or the storms. She'd learned that kindness opened doors you didn't even know were closed, that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with simply being human, and that new beginnings often arrive exactly when you've stopped expecting them, clinging to whatever keeps them afloat, just waiting for someone brave enough to throw them a rope.